Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to spend some time talking about kitchen cabinets. And the first thing we're going to talk about is cabinet construction. Just a fun, couple of pictures here looking at 1950s, kitchen cabinets, and, really kind of thinking back at how well they were built, how custom they were built, and in particular I love this image on the right, these blue cabinets where you open it up and it's this bright pop of red inside. Everything's built in and custom. It's just a really fun look back, and it's kind of fun to see where we've been and where we're going. So first thing, we need to think about basic cabinet dimensions. And there are standard cabinet dimensions that, all of our typical modular cabinetry is built to, and then we need to know these numbers, and this is how we need to plan our kitchens. So first thing, just typically, modular cabinetry is built in 3-inch increments, width-wise, okay? And we'll get there in a second, but keep that in mind. So then looking over here at our drawing on the left, we have a side elevation view of typical kitchen cabinets. So first here on the left, we can see first that looking at our base cabinet down on the bottom, a typical base cabinet depth, so if I was standing right here, looking towards the cabinet, is 24 inches. And the typical base cabinet height is 34.5 inches. That is the cabinet itself, not including the countertop. The typical upper cabinet depth is 12 inches, so it's exactly half of the base cabinet. Okay, if this came out all of the way, that would be pretty hard to work with. You kind of hit your face on the upper cabinet, basically. So upper cabinets are much more shallow, typically 12 inches. And then concerning the upper cabinet height, those vary. 12 inches to 42 inches is that typical range. So they can be quite short to quite tall. The tall storage cabinet over here on the right, that can vary as well. It tends to be either that they match the upper cabinet depth of 12 inches or go the depth of the base cabinet at 24. So that can vary. So most frequently at 24 inches deep. And then the height of a full cabinet like that, kind of think pantry style, can also vary. Generally in the 84 to 96 inch range, which will match the height of the upper cabinets. So those are kind of all in line. And then looking at both, whether it's a base cabinet, a full height cabinet, we have the toe kick. That's, at the base of the cabinet, so that as you walk up to the cabinet, you can kind of tuck your feet under a little bit without stubbing your toe. And those are typically 4 inches tall and 3 inches deep. This can vary. Some toe kicks are only 3.5 inches. That can vary, but typically they're 4. And then thinking about the countertops, okay? So the typical countertop height is 36 inches from the floor, okay? So from the floor surface to the top of the countertop is 36 inches. The typical countertop thickness is roughly 1.5 inches, which is why the base cabinets are usually only 34.5 inches tall. So 34.5 plus 1.5 inches gets us to our typical countertop height of 3 feet or 36 inches. The depth of the countertop is usually around the 25 to 25.5 inches. That will vary a little bit, 25 to 25.5, because we have a little bit of an overhang over the 24-inch deep cabinet, so that if you spill something falls off, it can go past the drawers and doors that are down below and the handle, so you don't have something spill like running into the, drawers and things like that. So there's a little bit of an overhang there. Typically, they can be flush, but that's not standard. And concerning our backsplash height, so it could be a piece of countertop actually going up, and those are usually 4 inches, but they can go all the way 18 inches. This might be tile or a solid surface or stone or something, so that can vary quite a bit, but minimum of 4. And that 18-inch sort of max on that is really because the typical distance from the top of a countertop to the bottom of the upper cabinet is 18 inches. That's 18 inches. And here you're seeing the 16 inches noted because sometimes cabinets will actually have a bit of an overhang in the front that makes them appear like they're coming down a little bit lower, but it's sort of just in that front area. Then if we think about, some typicals right away for ADA concerns, what, ADA access standards might be. These are some side views, some elevation side views of ADA compliant base cabinet scenarios. So here on the left, we're seeing that the absolute max height for a kitchen counter that meets ADA guidelines is 34 inches max. So it's 2 inches lower at its highest height than a standard 36-inch kitchen counter. And then the absolute minimum space that you can have here, you can see over here if someone was to pull up in a wheelchair, for example, is 27 inches. 27 inches. So really, if you want to think about kind of that max height at the top surface, you can see over here we're in that 28 to 34 inch height. Assuming that you have like an inch thick surface somehow, something like that. Okay, and then we can have either this is open, like we're seeing under this cooktop here on the right, or we can have a setback paneled area, and that usually happens where there's plumbing or something else to be obscured from vision and also protect the person from potentially like bumping their knee or burning their leg if the pipes get hot or something like that. So if that's the case, there's an actual panel here. We have an 8-inch minimum, and then the panel can start an 11-inch minimum at the bottom with a 9-inch minimum kind of toe kick scenario right there. Okay, so we can see this in a plumbing scenario as well, and that makes it a little bit more clear why you might have that panel. Okay, and you can also have open scenarios, again, like with a cooktop. All right, so those are the ADA standards we need to think about in terms of those heights and those countertop scenarios in a kitchen. If we're thinking about islands and seated islands, we have a few measurements we want to keep in mind there as well that are typical. So a lot of kitchens will have an island that includes some sort of seating, okay, and they might be flush or it might be a raised portion. So kind of looking over here on the right at this image, we see some of our standards that we saw before. So on the right we see 36-inch counter height. Yep, okay. And then here it's showing the 25-inch standard depth of a countertop. Again, it could be, a little bit deeper, 25.5 if you wanted more of an overhang. 12-inch standard depth of the upper cabinets. And then showing an ideal distance of 48 inches between the island and the cook surface if you have two cooks. We'll see that again in a minute. And then over here we're seeing an island, and this happens to be a 36-inch tall island. So that the seating is a little bit lower. It's counter height seating. So counter height seating is at 36 inches. Okay, and then we're seeing that, about 10 inches between the seat and the bottom of that countertop is comfortable when selecting stools. Okay, so you can absolutely have an island that has a 36-inch top that goes all the way straight out, and so you'll have counter height seating that's higher than table seating, which is at about 30, okay, but it's a little bit lower than what we call bar height. And then here noting that the ideal distance between the pendant and the island surface is 30 inches. Okay, if we look down here at the bottom to the left of that image, we see that we have that standard counter height island again, and then the bar height island in a side elevation view. So again, noting that it's a 36-inch high counter and that it has a nice overhang of about 15 inches there. Okay, and then to the right, seeing those numbers again, here we have it popped up to 42 inches, and that would be the bar height countertop. So 42 inches with a 12-inch overhang there. And then note that there's 6 inches between the back of the cooktop and where that rises up to give a little bit of that buffer room. And then again, 36 inches to the cooking surface, and then 30 inches between the cooking surface and the bottom of the vent hood. And then finally up here we see an isometric, view of typical kitchen island scenario. There happens to be a sink in here. Reiterating those numbers, 36-inch typical, with our minimum of 12-inch overhang of the countertop. But the entire countertop of this raised area where you could sit and eat or do whatever is 18 to 24 inches. So it's deeper than that 12 inches. It's just that the overhang is a minimum of 12. Again, that's at 42 inches from the top of the floor to the top of the countertop. And then we're seeing that, typical 34-inch, roughly that bar stool, it's standard. And then each person, getting, 30 inches of space is, pretty ideal. And then also showing here that having a 5 foot of clearance is preferred between the, the front of that island into where there would be another obstruction. 3 foot minimum, but 5 is, better for circulation and people being able to kind of navigate around that seated island. So looking at very basic cabinet box construction, when we really look at cabinets, we see them all joined together, as these solid units, but really each cabinet is a separate piece, and they're generally either frameless or framed, having a face frame. So frameless has a very kind of narrow kind of bezel to the front, I suppose. And when the drawers and doors are shut, that's all you see. Like we see here are just the doors or drawers. We don't see the frame itself. And with the face frame, the drawers and doors either sit on the surface and you see a perimeter of the frame around it, or they're inset. But either way, you see the frame. So looking over here, a very typical kind of generic, cabinet section, right? So we have 2 doors here showing our, typical countertop depth of around 25 inches, could be 25.5 again. The width, of course, will vary. Countertop thickness of 1.5 inches. Cabinet depth of 24 inches. And then here it's showing, which might seem different than what I said before, but it's showing the cabinet height of 31 inches and then the toe kick height here of 3.5. It's the same, it's just that they're separating cabinet and toe kick, where if you say it's 34.5, those are added together. So here it's separated between the cabinet part and then the toe kick part at the bottom. Again, the toe kick is the recessed portion at the bottom of a cabinet so that you can comfortably get up close to the countertop. Taking a, kind of blown apart look at frameless construction, it's really just taking a very basic frameless cabinet and sort of exploding it so we can see inside of there what it really looks like. So kind of taking a look at that drawer, for example, it's really a very simple box, possibly made out of solid wood like maple, or depending on the quality and cost of the cabinets, it might be a cheaper material, it might be MDF. There may be plywood as well. And then the drawer front itself is usually the nicer material. It's either solid wood or lacquer or laminate, depending, again, on the style. And you'll see here for the drawer and the doors, and all of that, it says 1 inch or 3/4 solid wood. Keep in mind that most typical cabinets have doors and drawer fronts that are 3/4 of an inch thick. 3/4 is typical. Nicer construction, maybe more high-end cabinets might be a little bit thicker, but 3/4 inch is typical, with the rest of the cabinet most likely being made out of plywood or possibly MDF. And then looking at a framed construction again, so this is inset, meaning that the drawers and doors will sit flush with the front, but here you'll see that you'll actually see that frame, where here it's thinner and that will be hidden entirely. But again, thinking about the doors, the drawer fronts and all that are 3/4 of an inch thick. That is where you're having, the solid wood. That is the part that we're really seeing, as well as the front face. And then the rest of the construction of the cabinet being more like MDF or plywood or, a cheaper material because it's not seen. And these are, really grouped together. Okay, so, looking at some framed cabinetry here in this wonderful vintage image, right? So we see the individual doors and drawers, and then the actual front face of the cabinet around here as well. So when you think about hardware, whether it's a vintage installation or something contemporary, is generally exposed. So you generally see the hardware. It's a decorative element that you see. It's not usually hidden. And because of the construction of frame cabinets, you can actually put kind of like a solid single front on smaller individual pieces so you don't see seams in between. That's a possibility to kind of hide that and make them look like a cohesive unit. Here's another example, a more contemporary example. And here we're seeing the frame again as well. But here the drawers and doors and things are inset. So we see the frame, but they're not, those doors and drawers aren't protruding. They're actually flush with that frame. And again, seeing, predominant handles and things because that's really kind of part of that look. Also an example of a counter height seating scenario. So the counter height, same as here, we don't have like a popped up bar height seat. Okay, and then when we think about cabinet sizes, again, typical cabinets run in 3-inch increments, both top and bottom, with the upper cabinets being 12 inches deep, and again, the lower cabinets being 24 inches deep. And you can see that pretty easily here, how much the bottom cabinets protrude past the upper cabinets. Custom cabinets, can be built, and we're talking about the typical modular cabinets, and so you can build things in different shapes and sizes, of course, in a residential application, but usually they're still within these numbers for usability. And just noting in this vintage image here that these upper cabinets are actually up quite high. This is a much higher distance than our standard 18 inches. So in terms of like ergonomics and things, these are very high reaches, and would be difficult for shorter people or of course seated people to be able to reach. So they're getting nice views through the rooms, but typically these aren't, this is not a common scenario. So looking at some front elevation views of basic cabinetry. Okay, so here we're seeing some of those, 3-inch increments. And first, really looking at these upper cabinets here. So, typical like 30, 36, 42 are very standard. And here note that we have that standard 18 inches between the countertop and the bottom of the upper cabinets. And here what you're seeing, by the way, this is sort of a raw picture of, cabinets being selected and all of that. You're seeing these kind of like little legs down here that are adjustable. So when cabinets are installed, they're on these feet that are adjustable. And once they're installed and everything is level, then a toe kick panel is put on the front that obscures that. So this is not a finished installation. That's actually what you would see before the toe kick is installed. Then again, kind of looking at some standard measurements here. So, starting at 9, typically being the smallest possible upper cabinet, and then going up, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, and 30. And notice that 21 is wide as it gets with being a single door. And then once we get to 24, it's usually divided. Even though it's one cabinet unit, it has 2 doors on it, because otherwise that one door gets to be very large to kind of swing open inside of a kitchen. Okay, and then here we'll see some kind of breakdowns of what these might look like. And if we're looking in the corner, we can have corner cabinets, right, that sort of fill up that corner space, have a door that comes out at a 45-degree angle, and often there's like a lazy Susan or something in there. Not always, but typically. Otherwise, when we get into a corner scenario, you can kind of have like a dead corner, and then the cabinets will go out this way as well, and you have a little bit of a filler panel in there. So it depends if you want to have that corner kind of bulky unit, or if you maintain that 90-degree angle, lose a little bit of space in that corner, and then just have a bit of a filler panel so the doors can open easily and not hit each other. Looking at base cabinets, again, very similar. So we have typical 3-inch increments, again, starting at 9. You can see basically matching the upper cabinets because that's an important thing. And then again, when we hit that 21-inch mark, we start dividing them into like two drawers, because they get very large when you're opening those into your kitchen space. And here again, we're seeing those corner units, either having a corner unit where it could be, simple shelves in there, or it might be, a lazy Susan, something like that. Or we could have a door that kind of swings open this way, or again, having filler panels and a little bit of kind of empty space down at the bottom. Again, these feet are for leveling, and once they're installed, we put the toe kick across the front. So that's obscured. And then just kind of thinking about, door styles and what these actually look like, there are a lot of variations. At first, thinking about the doors, it's much like looking at just doors in general. These are just smaller, they're on cabinets, but they're still doors. So we might have a raised panel door where that actual, the section in the middle is actually lifted up, it's raised. And raised panel cabinet doors, much like raised panel regular doors, are usually for more traditional and transitional types of looks. Then we can also have flat panel doors, and those, have a little bit of interest to them, but they're a little bit more sleek and clean, and these can be traditional, but they can be transitional, and they can even be contemporary, really depending on the finish, and the amount of detail included. So these can kind of go all across the board in terms of styles. And then slab cabinet doors, again, like regular doors, are very plain, very sleek and minimal. They're usually used in contemporary designs, but sometimes transitional as well. And sometimes we actually can kind of mix those depending on the situation. And then we also have accent cabinet doors. So accent cabinet doors may have things like glass, whether it's frosted or textured. There might be more interesting kind of like mullions and types, things like that. Louver doors, metal. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And these are done in, special areas. It's not every cabinet in the kitchen, because that could be, quite a bit. But usually just as an accent. Often on the upper cabinets, but not totally. It just really depends on the design. Sometimes on the upper cabinets, sometimes on the island. It's really a space where you want to, add some style and draw some attention, but we don't use them everywhere. Just accent pieces. And that's just a little bit about kitchen cabinets.